Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Letter of Law Interviews. My name is Sarthak Bharadwaj, and in the 16th episode of this interview series, I am absolutely delighted, thrilled, and very, very excited to be in conversation with Aradhya Sethia. Aradhya graduated from National Law School, Bangalore, and went on to Yale to study for an LL.M degree as an Inlaks Scholar. And he then did his M.Phil from Oxford and is currently a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Cambridge. So he has been educated at all the top institutions in India and abroad. And in today's episode, we will try to learn about his journey, and hopefully our viewers who are interested in pursuing a higher legal education will benefit from it. Other than that, Aradhya is a prolific writer and researcher. I will link his scholarship in the description section of this video, so be sure to check his work out. With that, hi Aradhya, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Sarthak. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. So to start this off, Aradhya, why don't you introduce yourself a little to our viewers?
Well, yeah. I'm doing law PhD right now at Cambridge. Mostly, when I'm not researching, I like to play a few sports, but not much. I'm basically from MP, which is where I grew up, a town called Javra, and yeah, has been a couple of years since I moved out. But yeah, I mostly work on constitutional law currently for my PhD. My PhD project deals with how should we regulate and think about political parties within constitutional law. It's always been a challenge because political parties really wield a lot of power, but we don't know what to do with them. In common law, there were entities same as like a cricket club or something like that. So I'm just this is a puzzle that has occupied me for a couple of years now. Is that there's such powerful entities that exist out there, but we barely think about them as lawyers. That's where I am right now.
Right, wonderful. So Aradhya, to start this off, why don't you tell us a little bit about your time in law school? You know, you went to NLS. So how was it like for you, and what were the activities that you were involved in?
Yeah, I was one of those N2 cutlet first years, as our seniors used to call it, where you enter and you're like, oh, there's this world out there, so many things to be done, and you just meddle with everything else and everything that's available to you. And then at some point you suddenly realize, oh no, you also have to do something about the grades and the exams that come up. And at some point, I narrowed down on a few activities. I did all those sort of regular activities that law students would do in their first year, second year, mooting, debating, other stuff. Probably the only kind of activity that I didn't participate and regret not doing it is alternate dispute resolution competitions. But apart from that, yeah, at some point I decided not decided, it's more of I discovered that I really enjoyed writing. And it's not because writing per se is very enjoyable task. It's very painful. It's horribly painful task. But it's perhaps because it's painful, it really makes you think about the issue that you're thinking about in much more detail than perhaps you could do in a spoken language, because when you're speaking, you can give expressions. You can probably take other people with you, thinking that, oh, how they're reacting to specific things. But when you're writing, you don't know how someone who's reading it would react. It's a very private activity to read something, and hence writing becomes very challenging. And I found most challenged writing, to be honest. And that's why I perhaps picked that. It's not that I was very good at it, but I was perhaps terribly bad at it. And it got me basically that it just bugged me that why I'm bad at it, and then just started focusing on it quite a bit. But to be honest, I didn't publish much till later years of my law school. Try to because perhaps I was still learning, so I didn't have much to publish, or at least not good quality stuff. But apart from that, it was a wonderful place. It's like a kid in a candy store when you walk in. There's so many things to do. So many activities, so many things to learn, mostly from your peers, sometimes on the rooftops of the hostels. Right? It was 5 wonderful years of many activities. But also, of course, it would be weird to say that all time in law school was just happy-go-lucky, lovely time. There were, of course, as young student, you face many insecurities, you face many challenges, and those, of course, exist. The friends you make are perhaps the one you'll be stuck with, even if you don't want throughout your life. Although I like all my friends who I made there. That way it was a learning experience, but also quite challenging. I often say this to my friends or many people when asking, what was the most challenging move for you? You moved from here to there to here. And I often say walking into the first year of undergraduate law school was the most challenging experience, because from there to somewhere else is you're expecting, and you're probably older to be a bit more mature, but you just don't know when you're moving as a 17-year-old to this places. But yeah, I really liked how sort of free going the time was. You had 4 hours of class in the morning, and you come back, and of course you'll have some work to do and stuff, but you bother about it when the deadlines come close. Apart from that, you just, or at least I was the one who was just making plans every day on after classes and what to do now, and the day will take its course. Those days are difficult to come by again, as much as one would expect. But yeah, that's how I've described.
Wonderful. So moving on, at what point did you decide to do an LLM? And also, second part of this question would be, at what year do you think law students should start thinking seriously about their LLM application?
Yeah, to be very, very honest, I actually didn't decide if I'm definitely applying for LLM or not till the beginning of fifth year. Just before fifth year was about to begin, I was like, what to do now? And this is the time to make a decision. And I was like, let's apply to a few places. So I'm not sure at what time one should decide, right? But one advice that I would give is, especially if you're in a 5-year law degree, right? If you are in a 3-year law degree, you probably have had an undergrad degree before, and you've lived through your college life and all of that, and you have much less time to decide. But if you're in a 5-year degree, it's also formative years, right? So one thing that I was very sure of is that I don't want to spend all my 5 years preparing towards that 1-year LLM, which will come after, right? It's really like a fascinating experience to be there, and it would be sad if unfortunate. So if all my 5 years were geared towards getting that one LLM. Of course, one does many things keeping in mind that, or one might have to do something like that. So sort of get a few things done, sort of participate in a few kind of activities, get your grades high, right? So that's one thing that I was. Unfortunately, right, I wish that you didn't require high grades to get into good LLMs and all, but it was kind of, getting good grades had no other role for me apart from the fact that you might require it at some point. So except for sort of just ensuring that in the while participating in other activities, I'm not letting my grades down. That's come down. That's the only thing sort of I was keeping in mind. Apart from that, the decision really came at the end of fourth year, beginning of fifth year, when I had to sort of start making applications. Now, there's no right time when one should decide, but perhaps I would say sometime in fourth year, if you're in a 5-year degree, or in second year, if you're in a 3-year degree, would be a good time to think about your applying. One advice that I would have perhaps is not to hurry. Not to hurry, right? So if you are not really pumped up about studying abroad, right? If it's just you don't know what to do after undergrad and you're jumping into it, then perhaps it's okay to do something else. It can only improve your profile and everything, right? And I also didn't know what I will do with my LLM. The only thing that I was sure about is that I wanted to study further. It was almost like I was not satisfied. I'm almost in my fifth year, and fifth year, I'm assuming that could be the case with most undergraduate law schools in India. Is kind of fun year would be an understatement, right? It's the year when you let yourself go. There are not many things at stake. It's or at least that it used to be so in NLS Bangalore. So that was the time when I decided, okay, most of my law school education is kind of over now, but I really still want to study further. It's it's bugging me, right, that I haven't yet completed the education. So if you're not sure about that you really want to study something further, then it's okay to wait it out. It's okay to get some work experience, and not okay, it will actually be much more beneficial to you, right? But if you're sure that something is bugging you, really want to study further, you're not satisfied with your current education, then yeah, for sure, that would be the time. Now, it also depends on some strategic reasons, right? Like your grades, you want to improve your profile. Sometimes you just might not know. You can't really guess when you're applying whether you'll end up getting into or not. It's neither did I, right? You apply and you see and let someone else make that decision. The idea is not to self-reject, which often tends to be the case. But yeah, apart from that, I wouldn't prescribe any specific year. The only thing I'd probably recommend for good LLMs is just try to keep your grades high without stressing yourself too much. I'm not saying everyone has to top the class. Neither did I. But keep them respectable enough that that a good LLM, that at least that won't be a roadblock. Everything else is up. There's no recipe. Do what you like. Right? But that's the only metric which will stay. Which will at least one of the metrics, right? You can overcome that very easily with other things you do. But still, yeah. Apart from that, I wouldn't say there has to be some serious planning for certain kinds of LLMs. Publications and all help, and that's why I didn't end up publishing anything, or at least not any major piece till the end of fourth year. It's when I decided on to apply for LLMs, I had some good papers, I realized, but I was just writing them to learn, right? As I said, I was terrible at that. So I was like, why not? Let's write more to learn. Yeah. And then realized that, now I should send some things I've written for publications because it might matter for LLM, if nothing else. And that's when in fifth year, I decided to send some things for publications, and it worked out.
Right. So what you said about waiting it out if you're not sure is actually a good segue into the next question that I have. You went to Yale directly after your undergraduate degree, without any work experience, though you had interned with the Attorney General and judges of the Supreme Court. So did the lack of a work experience feel like a bit of a disadvantage at any time, or were you able to cooperate and you think it doesn't make much of a difference if you're serious enough about your higher education?
Correct. Now, I wish I had two Aradhyas living life, right? If one who went without work experience and one who went with work experience. And I could work out that counterfactual. But I would say I at least didn't feel that way. So one reason was that because when I went, I had not really invested myself into any particular area of law. If I had worked in some area of law for a couple of years, I might come with a judgment that, this is my area, right? That's exactly why I took the work experience, that I will know what I want to specialize in. And once you do that, it might be limiting in the sense that you tend to very easily avoid courses which might not be your interest area, but which might actually be great courses to learn. So my LLM courses were very, very diverse, very broad. I studied constitutional law, but I also studied international trade law. I did some stuff, law and economics related work. I did some law and technology related work there. So it's one of the advantages of going early is that you really get to explore. So many options are available. I took a course in politics department, right? Which I might not have. I was like, this is my area, and this is where I specialize in. But on the other hand, if you have worked and I have 1 year and I have to focus, right? And then you can really tailor your courses according to the focus you have. So both of them have their pros and cons, right? I would imagine that it didn't really. I didn't really feel that feel that if I had worked, I would be a better LLM student. It might just be that I might have made the use of my LLM slightly differently. But it doesn't mean that I would discourage anyone from going immediately, right? Because when it comes to actually studying for courses, right? When you're there, what it counts is really you have to really put yourself academically into it, right? You can't just be like, I've worked, so I put my working skills. In fact, some of my friends also struggle with it because working skills are very different from what you require to exert yourself academically, right? As a student, or sometimes when you're doing research projects in your LLM. So it's very difficult to then come to terms with it that now you're not you don't have short deadline, you don't have sort of a client waiting tomorrow and you have to respond to the client, but you have a few months and someone is very rigorously looking at very sometimes nitpicky, sometimes very technical things. It's not just sort of producing a deliverable very quickly. So both have their pros and cons, right? My decision to go immediately was that as I said, I was ready to learn more. I was not tired. Some people have this, and many of my friends didn't apply immediately because they're like, enough of this classroom education for 5 years. Right? Can't there is someone telling us or someone keep lecturing us or whatever in the class or want to go out there. But I was not satisfied yet. So I think that was that's the point where one should decide when one is ready to go back to classrooms and one is ready to sort of do that work on their own.
Right. But as I understand, the LLM program at Yale is highly competitive. It's an extremely small class. And from what I understand, it's a course designed specifically for those interested in a career in academia. So despite not having a work experience, what do you think worked in your favor that helped you get admitted to Yale? Of course, you said that your grades are high, you had some publications, but looking back, what do you think worked well that helped you get in Yale?
Yeah, well, I would say luck. But actually, I've been obsessing about this song, which I found very recently. It's a song of late 90s, produced by this Australian director, L.L.M, called Wear Sunscreen. And I'd recommend it to your listeners and to you as well. Right, where this beautiful line, your choices are half chance, right? And we tend to either celebrate the decisions we made if they go right, and tend to blame ourselves if they go wrong. But if you're looking for a more concrete answer in terms of what should be the CV recommendation, etc., I mean, my guess might be that my publications, right? I had decent grades. I was not one of the top notch in the class, but had decent grades. And I had some publications. Yale also has a research agenda, which is the only LLM which requires you to write a research agenda instead of, I mean, they do have a personal statement, but they do ask for what would be, if you come here, then what would be your research scholarly agenda, right? I believe that might have been decent. But apart from that, it's very difficult to figure out what really works because it depends on the panel that's sitting that year and deciding amongst the applications you get, who ends up applying that year, all of that, right? So yeah, that would be my wise answer. But simplistic answer would be perhaps like a few like publications, perhaps my grades, stuff like that.
Now, Aradhya, because you have been educated at Oxford, you're being educated at Cambridge, and you've studied at Yale, so obviously you're well acquainted with the application process of various law schools. Do you think that applications can sometimes tend to be arbitrary? I mean, admissions, and that something might not work even if you have a good CV? Or do you think that if you do have good enough grades and publications, etc., chances are you might get in?
Yeah, I mean, look, by the very definition, because there's a very strong subjective element, right? Unlike, say, Indian examinations, where you just, I mean, the exam itself might be set up in a problematic way, probably doesn't test many things, but whatever way it's set up, you at the end of the exam you get a number, right? And that number might not show your ability or talent or something. It just shows that you were good on that day and that exam. That's it. So you know that you need to get such rank or whatever, this score to get into your. But this application procedures, you just don't know, right? I often get. I mean, there are some things which is very clear from some institutions, so for instance, in the UK, particularly Oxbridge, are very clear about very high grades as compared to US, which actually gives a lot more weightage to your work experience and other achievements. Here, if you're applying, then they're very, very sure that unless you are one of the top rankers, you will not make it. And I did apply to Oxbridge as well when I was in undergrad. Luckily, I could make it, but I still didn't know what decided, right? But in the US, for instance, it gets a bit much more uncertain because you don't know what will click with who's the selection panel, right? So you might have great work experience, but it's difficult to translate it into a CV entry, right? Mm-hmm. The CV entry might look very very stiff, regular and not much because that looks like an ordinary job, but it's very likely in that ordinary job you might have had some really impactful or just great learning experience, right? Now you do get statements of interest and all to show that, right? But as far as I know, at least in the postgraduate admissions, right? Undergrad admissions in this places could be different, but in postgraduate admissions, the thing with the statement of interest is that, and I might be wrong about it, right? But perhaps one of the reasons they put these questions to see students would commit any mistake rather than to expect some stunningly great statement of interest, right? I don't write some great statement of interest or personal statement. Someone will read it pedestrian. It's a very fair pedestrian statements of interest, very template-like, right? The ordinary, you use very ordinary language. No. Or at least I don't use any sort of flashy life anecdotes and all of that. I try to keep it very, because it's not that my life was geared to study for an LL.M, right? It's just one of the things you do, which is a statement you want to make it sound like, or everything you did was geared towards somehow this one degree, right? And if it's not, then it's difficult to come out. If it was, then yes, you might have a very linear trajectory, but if it's not, then it's difficult to come. So my understanding is that it's likely to be that there has to be an element of arbitrariness in admissions. But that doesn't mean that they're just closing their eyes and picking anyone, right? What I'm saying is that there's always a pool of students, right? I mean, for sure, there are many rejections which are very clear that there should be rejections by anyone, right? On certain grounds. But there's definitely a pool of students who come very close to getting admitted, who are rejected. Could very well be about the specific panel making that decision. Could very well be about some very minor things here and there in their CV and stuff. So once you're almost there, right? Within a larger pool of applicants, there will always be like a few people who you don't know how they're selected. Very interestingly, Cass Sunstein, who's a very famous legal scholar, has recently came up with a book on noise. Sorry, I'm confusing. No, not Cass Sunstein. Sorry. Recently, the Harvard philosopher has come up with the book Tyranny of Merit, right? Michael Sandel, right? And I was recently listening to a podcast about what he was saying about his key ideas, and the key idea was that half of when they go ahead selecting students after the shortlist, right? After the shortlist, the number of students that they have and the actual number of admissions they make, there's very little difference between the candidates, and it could very well be on the grounds which is very difficult to figure out if they are justified or not. So there's definitely some definite rejections, right? You could see that, some people might not be there, at least whatever criteria that the university has set up according to that. But then amongst many other rejections or acceptances that you get, there's a lot of chance and luck.
Right. Thanks for that. So moving on.
It's also humbling. It's also humbling for you, and both way. If you do well or if you do badly in the applications, that it's not all your fault. Neither is it's all your achievement.
True. That's very well put. So moving on, let's talk about a few of your publications that you were telling us about that probably worked in your favor to secure an admission in Yale. So I understand that numbers are by no means a metric to decide your application, but just so that our viewers get a broad idea, where all did you manage to publish as an undergraduate student, and how many publications were there?
Actually, I don't remember numbers, but it were not more than 4 or 5 publications, I think. So I published in some of the OUP journals. I used to work a lot on law and tech. I still take a lot of interest in law and tech. When I was an undergraduate student, I still continue to keep up to date with the developments in that field, although my PhD project doesn't directly deal with it. But I did publish in OUP's Intellectual Property Law Journal.
Wow.
I was there. I published in a law and tech journal there. Another paper was accepted in this journal called Journal of Evidence and Proof, which is one of the top evidence law journals. But I didn't end up confirming that publication and sent it somewhere else. But and there were a few Indian publications as well. I'm forgetting one on tax law. So it's basically, as you can imagine, right? You're writing undergrad projects, and when you're writing, you just write good projects. And when you are thinking of, now I should send some stuff for publications, and it's in your 4th year, I think, when I was like, I have some good papers. Why not just use them and send it across for publications? So yeah, there was one, I think in NLU Jodhpur Law Review, and I'm forgetting a couple of, but basically not more than 5 or 6. So I think there was an equal divide. I think 3 of them were in international journals and 3 of them were in Indian journals.
This actually brings me. Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. Please go on.
No. It's basically the kind of topics that you only want to address to Indian audience, right? And I thought, let's just go ahead with Indian journals, and the kind of the topics that might actually be relevant to some kind of global audience, a comparative law audience. I published it in international journals.
So just a connected question to this, do international journals carry more weight when an application is being considered, or are Indian law review journals of equal standing?
Yeah, so it all depends on specific journal, right? So it's not Indian versus international as much as just a relative reputation, so to speak, or just or your peer review, the kind of peer reviewers those journals are getting, right? So one can publish. There are many sort of international journals which are borderline scams, right? You can pay money and get published and stuff like that. So it's not about international versus Indian. It will be very easily figured. But some Indian journals are fantastic, right? Indian Law Review is a fantastic law review, right? Much better than many international law journals, I'm sure. And so was like some of the really good law reviews run by students in India, right? The NUJ's law review is great. NLS law review, the other law reviews. I was myself an editor of chief editor of Indian Journal of Law and Technology, which is actually one of the really good journals in law and technology around the world. Some international, some top law scholars are published in that, and there are many others, right? A couple of Indian journals, and it's producing great scholarship run by students, a very American model. But I think they've started asking for peer reviewers for most of the articles. So there's both an element of student run, but also peer review, which also really brings up the quality. So and most of them are open access. I actually really like publishing in Indian journals, mostly, especially if I'm writing something about India. If it's a more global piece, then I would like it to be published internationally. But I think because it's open access, most of the OUP and all those journals are not open access. So it really brings down the access. So that way it's not. So just do some background check before you decide which journal to get to and stuff, right? But try to avoid international for the sake of international, right? And some Indian journals are doing really amazing.
Right. Thanks for that. Another trend in publication these days is that of blogs and articles. You see a lot of law review blogs and articles coming up, and some of them are run by even Oxford. I think Oxford has a human rights blog. Harvard has one on constitutional law, so does Cambridge. Now, do you think obviously publishing a paper is much more significant than publishing a blog, but do you think you can put your blog and article publications in your CV as well, along with your article publications, or do they not carry that much weight?
No, you should actually. And in fact, I started the first writing of you on one of those academic blogs. Right? And I think blog writing is a very good habit. Going forward, it's going to be one of the major sources of legal scholarship. So, yeah, of course, if you're writing your own personal blog on Medium, then don't put it. Unless, I mean, put it, that's not a problem, but just that it might not carry much of the weight. But if you're publishing one of the sort of journal-run blogs, or some of the great blogs just run by legal scholars, right? Like in India, we know many of the blogs. Yeah. All of those, definitely, they are producing top-notch work. It takes so much time. Once you send it to them, by the time they come out, they could be out of date. It's blogs where the real action is happening, right? When it comes to a lot of interesting thoughts. Journals is it's not that journals don't have point, just that the kind of pieces that are more suited to journals are not, which are it's like long, it could be a piece which someone could go 10 years later and still could see and could learn something from it, or like 5 years later, right? Think about it that way. But blog is something that you want someone to read in the next couple of weeks. Then that's the place for you to go about publish it, right? And I think one should really develop that habit of writing sort of shorter pieces. Blogs also force you to not use much academic jargon, because most blogs would like to appeal to wider audience, at least wider than an academic journal would like to write. So that is a very good practice, and one should put it in their CV, irrespective whether it's run by journals or whether some sort of good legal scholars running their blog. Right, I've written a lot on spicy IP and Indian and the things, and when I was a student. And yeah, there's some there's some really good places where you can actually apply creativity, which journals wouldn't allow you to. So I remember AIP, right, All India Book Show, had come up with a video about spoofs and writing a piece about spoof and copyright, which journals wouldn't allow, or at least it will not come out so quickly. Like the video was out, and probably in the next week or so, I had a blog piece. So yeah, it really sort of harbors creativity, which is great. And yeah, but it's always a great idea to actually start and write blog posts and see if those develop into some ideas which could be relevant a couple of years down the line, and then develop them into broader ideas and publish in the journal, right? And blogs also a great way to think it out loud, because in academic journal, you're going through peer review, or at least much more rigorous. There are blogs also which have peer review now, but they're much more rigorous peer review, right, in academic journals. So blogs are a good way to put your thoughts out, and perhaps later then develop them into like a broader article, because once you publish, you can send it to a few people, or some people might respond to it. And you might end up thinking a lot more about it after you write a short piece.
Right, wonderful. So now I want to talk about the Inlaks Scholarship, which is one of the most prestigious scholarships and also extremely competitive. You got it. So basically a free ride to US education, which otherwise can be very, very expensive. Now, I won't really ask about the application process, because I think most of that information is available on the website. So to anyone who's watching, I will put a link to the scholarships information in the website, and you can check the broad contours out. To Aradhya, I will ask, what specific strategy did you apply, if at all there was one, while applying for the scholarship? Because it's so competitive and it's very hard to get in. And it's also not restricted to just law, right? I suppose there are other disciplines which also get the scholarship. So how was your journey of getting Inlaks like?
Yeah. So there was no particular strategy. I just prepared a little bit for the interview, which is mostly knowledge-based preparation, right? So once I wrote a very, I converted one of my LL.M statements geared towards Inlaks selection criteria to once I sent the application, then I was shortlisted for the interview. I read a lot of sort of legal developments that were happening around that time, right? So current affairs, but geared towards law and my the fields that I was interested in. So a lot of law and technology, constitutional law, those kind of issues that I was focusing on. Now, if you're interested in that, you probably might know those developments happening anyway, right? But it's good to sort of brush up, read a few either blog posts or op-eds on those areas, right? So that was kind of my preparation. Plus, also, you might have put many things on your CV, so just figure out exactly what you put, right? Some things you might have done a couple of years ago and you might not exactly remember. And you might have said, oh, I worked on a criminal case in this, blah, blah, blah. And they might ask, oh, what did you work on? What area of law, or what kind of case was this? So try to figure all of that out and like sort of take notes down what all you worked on. So that was the kind of preparation that I did. There are 2 interviews for Inlaks. First is taken by, it's law specialist interview, so it will be either lawyers or judges. A panel, I think of 3 to 4 people, I guess, so they will try to see like how you are, whether you're well versed with, I mean, not really the legal knowledge, but legal thinking. So if they throw some question at me on some ongoing issue, whether I can have a discussion with them, right? But I was at least I was not asked any knowledge-based questions. Tell me this or tell me that. It's mostly about, in fact, I was asked a question about plea bargaining and whether this idea, what do I think about this? And I remember them also telling me, do you want us to explain what plea bargaining is? We can. I was like, no, I know the basic idea, but even if you didn't know, then they will, or at least that's my experience. Now, again, I've only sat in my interview, so others might have had very different experience.
Right.
Final interview was a very general interview, so I don't know how I could prepare for it except for just telling myself calm down, because it could be sort of very different audience. It's a very generalist audience. There could be artists, there could be economists there were some philosophers, there were lawyers, like all journalists. So there could be very different kind of sort of people sitting in one room, and it could be a bit scary. Like now, I guess it might be happening online. Um, but um, um, but yeah, I don't know how else could I prepare apart from preparing for that first round, which is just brushing up my CV well, knowing exactly what I did and why I wrote what I wrote in my CV, knowing the good reasons for why I want to do LLM, how will it be of any use, right? Whatever work I'm doing after that. And being reasonably certain about what you want, at least in the immediate future, out of your LLM, right? Even if you don't, I mean, even if you don't know exactly where you'll end up, right? You don't need to have clear chalked out path, but this is what I want to do, or when I'm doing my LLM, this is what will be in my mind when I'm doing LLM. That this is where I'm headed after the LLM, or at least if things work out, this is what I'd like to be headed towards. So apart from those, I didn't have any sort of other preparations or sort of strategy in mind. I do remember a friend telling me this story on trying to work them up during the interview. Now I don't know if it's right or not, but I've heard the story of someone really challenging them, like, "Oh, why are you working on this? This is not really relevant. It doesn't help anyone. Why do you want to study this?"
Oh.
And as it turned out, the friend gave a good example and said, "Listen, I'll give you an example why this is important." And it was a very fairly straightforward example. And apparently they calmed down. This was just to see how you react in the pressure situation. So I guess apart from that, there's no just keep. Sometimes people do get frustrated when, "Oh, I know this so well. Why do you not know? So it's your fault, right?" So if you have such a generalist audience and someone asks questions about law and you're like, "Oh, why do you not know about this term called fundamental rights or proportionality or whatever, like whatever term you might know," which is very easy to for of course, if you're studying in that area, you know that term well, but you might not as a generalist. And probably the onus is on you to how to take them along with you in the conversation. But yeah, apart from sort of just it's again, as I said, it's a lot of luck. It's a lot of luck on that day. It could just be a very bad day. Like the interview day could just be you're not in your best mood, or the interviewers are not in their best mood, or exactly when you went in, they were not in their best mood, or there's just one question which threw away the entire conversation instead of. So you can't. I don't know, the planning or all of this really helps, but what preparation does is at least it gives you some confidence that, "Oh, I've done my best now. So I put some effort. I've read stuff and I've prepared my CV well." So it gives you some confidence. I think that's the only addition of preparation, not really as if like you could really crack the interview. There is some, or at least I haven't figured out. If you actually figure out, please let me know.
All right. So moving on, Aradhya, do you think that the law school that a student goes to in India matters while applying for the Inlaks or a top-notch college like somewhere in Ivy League or Oxbridge? Or do you think that law school isn't an important consideration?
It's a difficult question to answer. I wouldn't think it would be as important as we would think, or as many students tend to think. So it's definitely exaggerated, the impact of law school you're from. Um, it might be of effect in the sense that the law school you go to might give you certain peer group and might have certain additional opportunities which other law schools might not, and hence you might be able to use those opportunities to bolster up your experience and your CV and your knowledge. But as such, as sort of you are from this law school versus that law school is not particularly as important as you'd like to think, right? I have friends here who have come from very, very different law schools from India and are doing LL.M here, or have done LL.M here, and at other places. So it's as such, it's not important for its own sake. It's not the tag, right? It's someone coming from a law school which does not have as many opportunities might have to work to figure out how to find those opportunities, right? But once you do that, then it's which law school you went to will not necessarily hold you back. Yeah, that's what I would say. So it's reflected in it's reflected in how you might end up, that you might have to end up sort of putting extra effort, but I don't think it's reflected directly in terms of, oh, you're coming from this law school, so you shouldn't get into this and that, because at least empirically we have seen people from very diverse law schools going and doing LLM at absolutely top-notch places abroad.
Right, that's encouraging. So the next question is again about foreign education, especially in America. Without a scholarship, an LLM can be extremely expensive if you look at the tuition costs and everything. Now, a lot of students who perhaps go for an LLM might have the consideration of obtaining a job after that degree, but a lot of interviews and other writings have shown that getting a job after an LLM might not be as easy as you think. So do you think that without a scholarship, it is still a good investment to go abroad and study, especially when opportunities might be scarce after that, economically?
Look, depends very much on your personal circumstances. I wouldn't have been able to, right? Even if I wanted to. So yeah, unless, I'm guessing it's also on what depends on what you want to do after that, right? So it's definitely, if you want to go into sort of corporate law firm jobs, then they might be paying very, very well. So it might be worth investing. If you're very sure that's the career you want, then you might see this as literally as sort of an economic investment, right? For the benefit that you get out of very high salaries abroad in corporate law jobs, right? But if that's not the case, and if you say want to be in academia or you want to make some policy-based career or something else, then it will be very difficult for you to keep this very high. Either you're taking a loan or whatever, borrowing money from wherever you are borrowing money from. It will be quite a lot of pressure, right? And you might be then forced into taking up work that you might not like. But again, it depends on your personal circumstances. If you can afford it without any major pain, then yes. But I guess most people, most Indian students wouldn't be able to very easily. There was very few lucky. They have to be very privileged to not be worried about it. But most people would be. So in that case, I'll recommend that sort of if you're, depends on what you want to do after that, and if it's something where you might not reap a lot of economic benefit very immediately, right? If you are going into academia, if you're going into policy, if you're going into any such career, then you might, or say you're coming back to litigation in India where for at least a couple of years you're not getting paid very well, then it might be a very, then you have to think about it, whether this investment is worth it, right? And if it were me, I wouldn't do it. My personal choice would be, if I want to do any of these, come back, then, and if I'm paying the entire LLM cost myself, then I would spend years and years of my life bothering about it for a degree which is not necessary to do any of these things. Right? It does add up, but it's not necessary. But that really depends on your personal circumstances. I mean, I would also say that the impact of LLM and like further education is also slightly exaggerated. For some careers where you don't require, you can very easily sort of give into, I should do it. Right? If you get funding, yeah, definitely there's no harm in doing. It's 1 year of your life, probably it's very well spent for sure.
Right.
But if it's not, then you have to put a thought to it if it's like what. And particularly US LLMs tend to get very expensive. So yeah.
Well, that's great advice.
But I was sure I wouldn't do it. Without money, I wouldn't be able to afford it at all.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing that. Now I'll just quickly come to the final set of questions that I have, and they are slightly away from all the heavy issues that we've discussed so far. Now, Aradhya, you have studied at Yale, NLS as well, then Oxford, Cambridge. Where did you like studying the most?
Well, to be honest, my best time was spent at NLS. That's the time. I mean, these places are lovely. There's no doubt, but that's where like I found myself. I learned all the things that that's where I laid my foundations, right? And then you build up on that. And it's just the sheer joy of not having your time really tracked how kind of, which, I mean, to be honest, that's not the case here as well. It's not, because PhD does give you a lot of freedom and a lot of way to design your own schedule, but undergrad education also has it. Everyone else is also around you, or your friends are also doing the same. There's no immediate pressure of what doing next. And also some really great learning, because tends to be so that in Indian undergraduate education, at least until now, your key learning is not happening in classrooms, right? Or your key learning is not happening while you're doing all your academic or performing your academic obligations. Your key learning is happening totally outside, sometimes through activities or sometimes just conversations with your friends. I've learned so much. Now, those lingering conversations are just very difficult to come by. Happens once in a while, but they don't happen as sort of impromptu, unplanned. And definitely, I think some of the, yeah, I mean, one can argue you didn't have all the facilities and all of that, right? Or maybe I'm just romanticizing. Maybe it's just a nostalgia. But I have no doubt that if someone asks me which the best time that I've spent out of all these places, I'll say my undergrad. But wow. Yeah, that's it. I really like all the places I've been to. But yeah, it's just probably nothing to do with the place, but the stage that you're at. It's just when you're undergrad, it's much easier to have all those
great
conversations.
So just
please enjoy the remaining years you have, Sarthak, and all other listeners.
Right. I mean, just it is very nostalgic, because for the last 2 years, all our classes have been online, and the real law school experience has been missed out on. And I'm hoping that we can all get to go back to our regular classes soon. But yeah. Moving on. So Aradhya, now what comes next for you? You're doing your PhD, and what do you plan on doing after that? Is a career in academia under your consideration, or what are you thinking about?
I'm actually still thinking about it, like what I should be doing after my PhD. PhD is still a couple of years to go. So now not jumping the gun. We'll see when I have to make the decision. I pretty much like the academic engagement with law, but that's different from making a career in academia. And that decision one shouldn't just make based on stuff one's interest, but also all the realistic sort of problem. There could be problems, or there could be opportunities, whatever it is, considerations, right? In a career, anything that once it becomes a career from mere interest has its own limitations, and whether those limitations are something that I'm happy with or not. At the same time, the practice of law is thoroughly fascinating as well, right? So yeah, let's see. One of the wherever 2 years down the line, I think I want to end up.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm excited to see where you land up, and I'm sure there's so much to learn from your journey and from what is to come. So I'll quickly ask my final question now. So before we started recording, I actually asked Aradhya to fix his camera, and he removed a fat book from underneath his tablet. So I will ask him, Aradhya, what kind of books do you enjoy reading? And this discussion on books is something I usually have with all the guests who've been on Letter of Law. And since you work on constitutional law, if you have any recommendations for us in that area that you'd want our viewers to read, or you think they should.
Yeah. Right now I'm reading a short story collection of this Argentine author called Boris. And it's a short story collection called Labyrinth. And sounds really amazing. It's taking me a lot of time because it's a very intense, although short story, it's a very small book, but it's taking me a lot of time because it's written in a very intense way. And once you read it thoroughly, you realize that no, it's for a reason. So I'm thoroughly enjoying reading that now. One of the short story that I'd recommend to your listeners is A Lottery in Babylon. I think Babylonia, I'm not sure, but just if you search Boris story on a lottery, and it's very interesting story about what would happen if you try to design a society around luck. And how would basically on the basis of a lottery, right? Many of your very, very important decisions in life is just around lottery, on who gets what. That ties up very interestingly into this discussion that we're having, right? On how much is in your control and how much is not. But to be honest, a lot of my learning these days are happening from podcasts. And perhaps we should really embrace them as instead of book recommendations, now I started asking people for podcast recommendations as well. And it's a great job that you're making this podcast. But yeah, I really like this podcast, Radio Lab, which is run by WNYC. Really wonderful stuff, lingering on. So this is actually Radio Lab is like started as a science podcast, but it's very well designed podcast. But of course, there's an Indian podcast, The Seen and Unseen. It's about lingering conversations over hours, and some really fascinating discussions there. I was recently listening to Karthik Muralidharan's episode on Indian healthcare. Some fascinating points there. So yeah, perhaps you should add this to one of the questions that you asked your guests about podcast recommendations, and I would love to know some from you.
True, and if none of my guests take Letter of Law's name, I won't release their episode.
But because you asked me about constitutional law as well, I would recommend this book, which actually recently also got a big prize, How Constitutional Rights Work. So the interesting, because we tend to focus a lot on sort of constitutional rights in India. Indian constitutional law is very occupied with that. It's very interesting to know what all it requires for a right to actually work from just guaranteeing it in the text. That's a very interesting book, which I am actually currently in the process of completing. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
great. So, I mean, just before we conclude, since we're on the topic of podcasts and Yale, there's a podcast run by Scott Shapiro, who's a professor at Yale, called the Jurisprudence Podcast. I absolutely love that. And perhaps my viewers would like to check that out. And with this, Aradhya, I think we can come to an end of today's conversation. Thank you so very much for taking the time out and speaking so candidly on a lot of issues, especially for students who don't have access to people who go to these top-notch universities. I think videos like these can be a great resource, and I hope your journey inspires and helps those of us who are watching this. I know it did help me a lot. So thanks a lot, Aradhya.
Sure. Just as a concluding line, so I don't know why I'm mentioning this song again and again. I should probably get royalties, which is where Sunscreen. There is a very interesting quote there in the same song is most interesting 22-year-olds I know didn't know what to do when they were 22. Most interesting 40 years old I know still don't. So if you don't, law student, don't worry about it. Keep thinking, but something will fall in place.
Wonderful. I think with this, I will stop recording. Thank you once again very much.